Have you ever sat across from a friend, drowning in a terrible week, just desperate for a single moment of real connection? You finally take a breath, open your mouth, and say, "Man, I've had such a rough few days." But before you can even finish, they jump in. "Oh, tell me about it. My week was insane." And just like that, the stage is stolen. In the blink of an eye, your pain is completely overwritten. You sit there nodding, forcing a smile, throwing out a hollow wow or really, but inside, your throat goes dry. You feel completely erased. You feel like a cheap prop in their one-man show, leaving the interaction utterly drained, empty, and somehow more alone than before. If this hits too close to home, you're dealing with what psychology calls a conversational narcissist. But here's the twist that twists the knife. You probably think they're just arrogant. You think they're obsessed with themselves and couldn't care less about you. But the cold, psychological reality is much darker. They aren't talking to show off. They are talking to survive. Welcome to the deep end of human behavior, where we look beneath the mask of confidence to find the terrifying void hiding underneath. There's a strange, heavy relief that comes when an emotional ache finally gets a name, because until then, you internalize it as shame. You tell yourself you're too sensitive, too needy, too dramatic for wanting a conversation that actually goes both ways. You wonder why you leave certain people feeling smaller than when you arrived. Psychology calls this pattern conversational narcissism, but let's be entirely clear. This isn't a medical diagnosis. This isn't a villain backstory. It's a defense mechanism that happens when conversations stop being shared spaces and start becoming survival tactics. But here's the first hidden truth most people miss. This dynamic is not accidental. It is predatory, but not in the way you think. Ke, ai ki hoi thoai thuk, chatla mot ke san timbo lok. They don't just dump their noise on anyone. They subconsciously screen and target those who have weak boundaries or an overdeveloped sense of empathy. They don't want a conversation. They want a host. You are not a random casualty of their loudness. You were chosen because your silence promised them a safe, uncritical harbor for their chaos. Your empathy became the very cage they locked you in. When someone dominates a room, our immediate reflex is to judge. We assume they love the sound of their own voice. But psychology asks us to look at the cracks in the armor. Many people who constantly pull the spotlight back to themselves aren't trying to impress you. They're just trying to stay afloat. Their relentless talking isn't a performance. It's a desperate coping mechanism designed to keep a monster at bay. And that monster is silence. For a stable mind, silence is just a breath, a peaceful pause. But for someone whose self-worth is hanging by a thread, it feels fatal. The second the attention shifts away, a suffocating weight settles on their chest. The fear of becoming irrelevant, forgotten, faded. In that exact moment, talking becomes their only anchor to reality. I speak. Therefore, I exist. They rush to relate every story back to themselves because they are genuinely terrified of what happens if the noise stops. It doesn't excuse the exhaustion they cause, but it explains the desperation underneath the volume. On the surface, they look completely unshakable. They're charismatic, expressive, always ready with a louder story or a sharper opinion. But it's a classic psychological cover-up. The core truth is tragic. These people usually possess zero stable self-worth. Think of their ego like a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. No matter how much validation you pour in, it drains instantly. Attention is the water. The eye contact, the laughter, the reactions. It soothes the emptiness for a second, but the relief never lasts. The moment the focus moves, the shield falls. Sitting quietly while you speak triggers a subtle, claws-in-the-throat panic. They feel like if they aren't actively fighting for the floor, they might completely disappear. So they raise their voice, interrupt, and push you out, not to overpower you, but to quiet the screaming insecurity inside their own skin. Loudness is never strength. True confidence can sit comfortably in the quiet. But when you're empty inside, volume is the only weapon you have left. To see exactly how this trap springs, we have to look at how humans actually talk. Sociologists point out two primary responses in conversation: the support response and the shift response. If you say, "I'm thinking about changing careers," a support response keeps the focus on you. "Oh, really? What's driving that?" It builds a bridge. It creates depth. But a conversational narcissist relies entirely on the shift response. You say you're changing careers, and they immediately counter with, "Oh yeah, I changed jobs last year and my boss almost broke me." The topic stays the same, but the spotlight is stolen. Why do they do this? Because a support response requires emotional security. It requires patience, surrendering control, sitting quietly in your world without needing to be the main character. For them, that background role feels incredibly unsafe. They aren't trying to ignore you. They are just frantically maintaining their own equilibrium, and you are left holding the heavy silence they are too terrified to face. This breeds a deeply toxic dynamic, competitive suffering. It's the moment pain stops being shared and starts being outmatched. You mention you're exhausted. They're closer to death. You had a stressful week. They've had the worst month in human history. You open up about a broken heart, and they drop a tragedy that completely eclipses yours. It feels like empathy on the surface, but it's actually an emotional eviction. Your pain doesn't land. It gets erased. They often genuinely believe they're bonding with you. In their mind, matching your trauma with a bigger story is their way of saying, "See? I get it." But because they can't sit with an emotion that isn't theirs, they reach for their own armor. Over time, the people around them learn a quiet, bitter lesson. Don't share. Don't open up. It will just get taken over. And when pain becomes a contest, empathy leaves the room, leaving nothing but isolation behind. But let us dissect a darker, much more uncomfortable truth here. One that hurts to admit if you are always the listener. Why did you stay? Why did you sit there for 2 hours playing the silent martyr? Sometimes our willingness to be drained hides a secret, covert narcissism of our own. We hold on to that exhaustion because it makes us feel morally superior. We feed our quiet ego by being the perfect, long-suffering friend. We turn their loudness into proof of our own holiness. But hidden martyrdom is just another shadow of narcissism, a silent deal you made to feel needed without having to be vulnerable yourself. To understand where this entire cycle was born, we have to go back long before adult friendships, back to the childhood bedroom. These patterns are rarely random. They are scars. Many conversational narcissists grew up in emotional deserts. Their parents might have been physically there, but they were emotionally checked out, overwhelmed, or entirely self-absorbed. In those houses, being a quiet, good child meant being completely abandoned. A child's brain adapts quickly. They realize that when they screamed, performed, or threw a tantrum, someone finally looked. When they stayed quiet with their sadness or fear, nobody came. They learned the hard way that emotional space is never offered. It must be taken. Silence didn't mean peace. Silence meant drowning. They grew up believing that who they are fundamentally isn't enough. Only what they produce or perform matters. They use words not to connect, but to build a wall. They talk to stay in control, to avoid being truly questioned, because letting someone else speak feels like fading away entirely. This dynamic doesn't hurt everyone equally. It preys heavily on empaths. If you are a deep listener, someone who instinctively holds space and adjusts to others, You are the perfect host for this behavior, not because you're weak, but because you care. You nod, you affirm, you ask the follow-up questions, carrying the entire emotional weight of a dead-end interaction. You become the dumpster for their unmet childhood needs. You leave these encounters feeling heavy, replaying it in your head, wondering what you did wrong. Did I share too much? Was I boring? You end up blaming yourself, but the exhaustion doesn't come from caring too much. It comes from caring completely alone. Attunement without reciprocity isn't a friendship. It's unpaid emotional labor. Eventually, the most compassionate people don't fight. They just quietly drift away to protect their own sanity. And here lies the ultimate tragedy. The people who dominate conversations crave real connection just as desperately as the rest of us. They are dying to be understood. But the exact weapon they use to fight their loneliness is what ensures they stay lonely. Slowly, their circle shrinks. Friends stop sharing real stories. They keep things superficial. They cancel plans. They fade out. What's left is a wide, empty circle of acquaintances, people to grab a casual drink with, but no one who truly knows them. No one who feels safe enough to stay through the vulnerability. They look around, isolated, completely unaware that the very behavior meant to pull people close is what's pushing them away. They are surrounded by noise, yet utterly alone, terrified to stop talking because they dread the silence waiting for them. So, what do we do when the talking stops? If you're the listener who is constantly left drained, remember this: their hunger is not a reflection of your worth. You are not boring. You are not invisible. It is entirely okay to set a gentle, unyielding boundary. I really need a second to finish what I was saying. If they can't grant you that space, leaving isn't cruel. It's just clarity. Stop playing the savior to someone who only wants an audience. And if you recognized yourself in the cracks of this script, take a breath. This isn't an indictment. It's an invitation to heal. You don't have to force yourself into a painful silence that makes you feel like you are disappearing. There is a way to bridge the gap. The next time you feel the urge to trigger a shift response, use the mirror cure. Catch yourself. Instead of just hijacking the story, say, I went through something so similar, and it almost broke me. Do you want to hear how I handled it? Or do you just need me to open up the floor and listen right now? By doing that, you transform your survival mechanism into an instrument of profound connection. You give them a choice, and in doing so, you keep yourself visible without erasing the person across from you, because you need to realize something beautiful. You don't disappear when you stop performing. You don't lose your value when you stop competing for space. True connection never belonged to the most interesting person in the room. It belongs to the one who cares enough to stay present. If this video helped you feel seen, you're not alone here. This channel explores the quiet psychological patterns that shape our relationships and how to heal them. If you want to continue these conversations, subscribe to the channel. And if this topic resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel a little less invisible today. Thank you for watching.